Welcome to The Fully Mindful, where we explore what it means to live with intention, creativity, authenticity, and connection. I'm your host, Melissa Chareau, mindfulness and breathwork facilitator, neurodivergent lawyer and coach, and fellow human navigating this wild and beautiful ride we call life. On this podcast, we dive deep with interviews featuring inspiring guests, share solo mini episodes packed with guided mindfulness practices to help you center and thrive, and mix things up with tangents and sidebars, where my friend and fellow podcaster Debbie Harrell from the New World Normal joins me for some real, random, and meaningful conversations. So if you're ready to pause, reflect, and expand, you're in the right place. Let's get fully mindful.
Fortunately, I've had some readings when I've been in classes with other people, and they will say, like, your dad is really proud of you for doing this and for stepping out and doing something different. And ironically, my dad was an attorney too. So the fact that I'm getting like the seal of approval from the other side, even though I'm not practicing law, and that I'm helping people in this way. And truly, when I went into law, I just wanted to help people. And law was one of the ways that I saw as a way to help people, right? That's all I knew, kind of. So now I'm doing that, but just in a very different way. And to me, this is so much more fun than practicing law.
Hey everyone, it's Melissa with The Fully Mindful. Well, we explore how people find their purpose or purposes in life. And sometimes this can be kind of unusual. Well, that's our next guest. And you're going to just trip out on Kristen Swinehart, because she's what I would call a modern psychic medium. And I would say it's not often that you hear of a corporate lawyer becoming a medium. In other words, she is able to communicate with the other side, and she's really good at it. And her story is fascinating about how she discovered and developed these abilities, and really touching with how she's able to help people gain some closure or insight, or just be able to move on with the reassurance that they are not done with this life, that they can talk with people on the other side or beings on the other side and gain some insight and some acceptance and some closure. She's also really fun, and she's young, and she does these things from anywhere from a very private, very intimate session to out there in the world with gallery sessions with a whole bunch of people. And it's just a fascinating conversation. Whether or not this is something that you've thought about before or not, I urge you to listen. It's a really interesting conversation. And when else are you going to hear about a lawyer turned psychic medium except here on The Fully Mindful? Hi, everybody. This is Melissa with The Fully Mindful, and I'm here with my guest today, Kristen Swinehart. You're going to find all about her in a moment, but just a little intro so you get a feel for her. She is a professional psychic medium, and she knows the experience of grief intimately, as well as the impact it can have on one's life. Having lost her father at 18 years old, she began to question and dive deeper into life after death, ultimately leading her to realize she is a psychic medium and can communicate with spirits on the other side. Kristen left her corporate career as an attorney to pursue helping others to move through their grief using her powerful and accurate mediumship. Now she holds group readings at corporations, works with families of high-profile individuals who have passed, and helps private clients move through any form of grief they may be experiencing, from the loss of a job to the loss of a loved one. So I'm very pleased to have you here with me today. Kristen, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you, Melissa.
I'm welcome too. Yeah, we're all welcome.
Yeah, you're welcome to be here.
Yeah. So Kristen, you have this, the little bio that we just introduced people to kind of introduces a lot of really good stuff to talk about tonight. And I guess one is, and I think that people will be curious about, is your origin story. And you talk a little bit about that in your bio, about how you first came to this. But let's talk about that a little bit. So you're kind of on your road, you're in life, you're young, and then what happens? You experience some major catastrophe, some grief, right?
Right. Yes. So my father was actually much older when I was born. He was 60 years old. So from a young age, he kind of prepared me to like, hey, you have an older father. At some point, I'm not going to be around. I won't live as long as the other kids' fathers do. So I remember learning that at a very young age, which that's kind of an interesting program to grow up with from a very early age. Like, hey, your dad's going to die young when you're young, you know? And so when I was 14, his health was already on the decline. And so from the time of 14 until 18, when he passed, a lot of my responsibility at home was taking care of my father because my mom was working full time. So I would go to school, cheerleading practice, and then come home and make my father a snack, you know, whatever he needed done. And that's obviously a very strange way to have a teenage growing up, right? I was very busy doing all the teenage things and also helping with my father. And then he passed shortly after I graduated from high school. And I just couldn't really understand. Like, that's when the wheels started to turn. Like, okay, wait a minute. We live and then we die. And then, like, then what? Like, what happens then? And you know, I'll always reference that, you know, a lot of times people have a horrible job that they hate, you know, right? So I'm like, well, you work this horrible job you hate and then you die. Like, that's even worse. So from that age, I just got a little more curious, but it wasn't until probably, and when I was like 25, like I was practicing law myself and I was like, God, I do hate this. Like, I don't want to do this and then die too, you know? So I started a deep personal development journey and spiritual development. And then, you know, just kept digging and digging and digging to try to be like, there has just got to be more to this than what I'm seeing here. So that's how I got started.
Yeah, and if we could talk a little bit about, and I think it's fascinating, this experience that you had as a young person being prepared for death, because that's a really uncommon story in our culture, anyway, in the United States, to have discussions about the inevitable that somebody is going to die. And so I'm wondering what kind of impact that had on you, or what you were thinking, or if you had conversations with friends about that, because I bet you they weren't having these conversations at home.
Right. I guess at the time I didn't really think much about it as far as like having conversations with friends, but I would remember what I would remember is telling my dad, like, why do you always have to say that? Like, I don't really want to talk about that. Or, but it kind of just got to a point where he just was like, yeah, but Kristen, I just want you to be prepared for that. And one of the things that he taught me then that I still live by today and definitely in hard times is like, no matter what happens, I want you to just keep living. And that set the stage literally for so many things because my father actually passed away on the night of the day of my senior dance recital. So I had been at the hospital after he had passed, and then I went and danced that night. And the people on my dance team were like, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "This is exactly what he would want me to be doing. I don't want to miss my senior dance recital, and I'm going to just keep living." So I think it set the stage at a very young age to really have some different thoughts and principles around what life is and also how to move through grief and not letting it completely derail what we're also capable of doing if we don't let it get in our way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's beautiful. I mean, you did exactly what your father would have wanted and had prepared you for, right? Because he had prepared you for the thing that we're all going to experience, which is death. Yeah.
Yeah, and now like from this side of it too, I mean it's very fascinating to me, death. I know that might sound really weird, but certainly the more that I've learned and kind of dive in and it's like, wow, you know, it's very interesting. And I do think looking back, like it would be like it's odd we don't really talk about it all. Like you said, it's inevitable. And so it's like this thing we never talk about, or it's like, you know, but I feel like we should be because it's going to happen. And then it's just weird at the end when somebody dies and nobody talks about it or whatever. It's like, we knew this was going to happen.
Yeah, it's inevitable. I remember having a conversation with I during the pandemic. There weren't buses, school buses, and that sort of thing, and so I was driving all the kids to school that were along the route, right? And I remember having this conversation. I don't remember how it came up, but my daughter was probably about, I think she was 13 or 14, and somehow the kids were talking about, oh, that that person died or something happened, and I said, well, everybody dies. And my daughter just looked at me and in the typical teenager, Mom, And I said, well, no, I mean, it's true. The other kids in the car were fine with it, but it is something that it's just, we don't talk about it in this culture. And there are other cultures that do. There are some Buddhist cultures and Buddhist practices where I think it's the monks will go in and look at various stages of death and different corpses because that is inevitable, and to meditate on the different stages of dying and decay. And it's interesting because I think it does prepare us, or at least has the ability to bring us with more peace and ease with the experience rather than to be fearful of it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and had I known at the time when my dad passed that there was this ability to communicate with the spirit, even when they're not in physical form, which is now my experience, to me, I feel like that would have brought me more peace because although I can't see my dad in physical form, like I know when he shows up now, or like there's moments where I'm like, oh, for sure my dad is here right now, or oh, that thing happened because my dad, right? So now it's like I've learned to have this whole totally different relationship with my father from spirit form. But like if people knew, like, hey, maybe it's not really the end. And look, everyone's going to have different beliefs, but mine is it's not really the end. I can still have contact, and I'm sure there are signs where he's showing me he's around. It is a little more comforting.
Yeah, and I think there are some other cultures and religions where that is more common, right? It's more commonly understood that the dead are still here, their spirits are still here, and they still communicate with us. It's really in our Western culture that has become, at least that I've seen or know of, has become looked at as like, oh, well, that's not true. Once you die, right?
Right.
And that's it. It's over. And so I want to get into that a little bit. When did you first start noticing, like, maybe there's something after life, and maybe I know a little bit more about this than the next person?
Let's take a quick break.
Hey, everybody, this is Melissa with the Fully Mindful. It's the new year, and I bet you're feeling the need to unlock your full potential and embrace empowerment, or maybe something completely different. Well, I'm excited to offer a new program with one-on-one breathwork and coaching sessions. We'll embark on a truly transformative journey of self-discovery, combining conscious, connected breathwork and embodiment coaching, and more. So contact me, Melissa, at The Fully Mindful, for your transformative session today.
That would be 20 years after my father died. So it really was like a 20-year journey. Like it wasn't until I was 38 that I started to realize, like, maybe I know things that like I shouldn't really know, or how I know this. And this was through a lot of work with a Peruvian shaman where I finally just asked, like, do you think I could be a medium? Because I just know, like, it's weird. I know things I don't know, which is called claircognizance, which is interesting because how would you ever really know things that you don't know other people don't know, right? Like, so it's not like I visually saw dead people walking around or something. I had no experience like that. I just would know things that other people didn't know and didn't know that. So, and because I had lost my dad, which was part of the reason I even got down this, spiritual and personal development rabbit hole, did I ever realize that this is part of who I am? And now looking back, I can see examples of when I've been using this my entire life. I just didn't know that it was something unique or different or anything like that.
Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned being in your mid-20s and being a lawyer and having a sense of like, I don't know about this whole thing, like doing this thing for the rest of the time that I'm alive. Was there anything from that time period that you can look to that you were getting some, in hindsight, you were getting some sort of notion that maybe you were knowing things that other people didn't know, or like you said, you had maybe some claircognizance or something else going on at the time too?
Well, now I look back and I chuckle because I did not want to be practicing wills and probate work. But ironically, I was working with an NFL agent because I wanted to do sports and entertainment. He also had a wills and probate division, which of course, that's what I got to do the majority of. So now it's just a little bit hilarious that I was dealing with death and dying on the front end and seeing all the fighting, like, oh God, this is really miserable. And so, but to your question, like, did I know other things? Not that I remember, but I do know that I was like, I thought I was going to be helping people, and all these people are fighting. Nobody seems to be happy. And here we are, like everybody's having a tough time because somebody's dying, and I don't feel like I'm helping alleviate any of that pain. Right. So I had the experience of like, oh, I thought I was helping people. And then I just saw people in their worst. And that was one thing I was like, I got to get out of this because I do not care to see this at all.
Yeah, for the listeners, anyone who's not familiar with the legal field, I mean, they say criminal law is bad. They say employment law can be bad. They say divorce law can be bad, but it's really the wills of trusts. It's really people fighting over what is going to happen with their soon to be or already past loved ones' belongings.
Yeah. And then the family members that come out of the woodwork who now think that they're entitled to money, or, the family was totally fine until somebody got more than somebody else. Or, I mean, it's the weirdest thing. It's like, it could be a totally, quote unquote, normal family. And then all of a sudden somebody dies and it's like a disaster. And there's not a whole lot you can do as an attorney to like make everybody happy. And quite frankly, if you're making everybody happy, then you're probably doing something wrong.
Right. Yeah. So how long were you doing that kind of work?
I mean, it was probably only less than a year. And that was one of those things where and maybe this is where my claircognizance comes in. Like sometimes when I know I'm in like a situation I need to get out of, like this was one of them. I was like, okay, yeah, this is not for me. I'm going to be like, lose my mind here. And so I got myself out of that pretty quickly because I knew. And now it makes even more sense because I'm an empath, which means I can feel other people's energy. So can you imagine while everyone's in like this tumultuous time, and then I'm picking up on their energy, not knowing that it's not mine. So it made my job even harder because I felt all kinds of emotions that weren't even mine.
Yeah, it's like a big toxic stew that you're sitting in, right?
Yeah,
Feeling all of
exactly.
that energy and at the time, not really understanding that that's what was happening.
Exactly. Yeah. Now looking back, I'm like, God, it's actually amazing I survived as long as I even did, even though it doesn't seem like it was that long.
Yeah. Yeah, but it still was many years before you came to know that you had these other abilities. So what led you, what was on the path next that kind of continued to lead you to that ultimate path of discovering, with the help of a shaman, of who you really are?
So next it was really interesting because out of the blue, but not really, I look back at all these things that just seemed so coincidental, but I had the opportunity to manage comedians in New York City. And so I was like, oh, perfect. This is like entertainment related, way more along what I'm interested in. So I moved to New York City. I did that for a little bit. It was 100% commission. If you know anything about trying to make money off of like artists, it's not easy. So
That's the real comedy.
yeah, I think I became the starving artist, even though I wasn't like performing, but that was super tough, but it also was a lot of fun. I learned a lot through that. And so, I mean, I ended up doing all kinds of things. Real estate in New York City in 2008, probably not the best profession then either. So I just would follow, and I've done this my entire life. I follow like breadcrumbs of things that like, oh, that looks like that could be interesting, or oh, let me try that out. So I'm not a very linear path that I've had, but now that I look back, part of it's really funny because I've had so many different experiences and know a lot of things about a lot of stuff that when I do readings for people, I have a really wide library to pick from of information because of experiences I've had, which always helps because the larger frame of reference you have, the more in depth you can go.
Yeah. So do you remember the first time that you kind of had some awareness that you knew things that maybe you weren't, it's not that you weren't supposed to know, but that, it seemed unusual for you to know?
I would say what started to happen that I picked up on would be, so you could sit next to me on an airplane, tell me your entire life story. I know that's common for a lot of people, but then people would say to me, oh my gosh, you told me exactly what I needed to hear today. Like, it's like you knew exactly what to say. I feel so much better after talking with you. And I would continue to hear this on a regular basis. And so I just got accustomed to being like, well, yeah, of course. Like, that's what everybody says, like, no big deal. And even when I was 8 years old, my mom said that she would ask me like have me problem solve. She'd be like, if I had a question or a challenge, I would ask you and you could problem solve it, which who's doing that at 8, right? Like, I don't even know. So I think that when I look back now, I'm like, oh, that's just something I got used to doing. Like I just was good at helping solve people's problems, but I didn't know why, but I was obviously getting information from someplace else. So it wasn't really anything that like really struck me that, oh my gosh, like I definitely know I know things. It just was like, well, that's weird. Oftentimes people will tell me the same exact thing and they're strangers that I know nothing about. So that kind of tipped me off a little bit.
Yeah. So how did you find yourself with a shaman? And I think you said Peru. Was it Peru?
Yeah, I actually didn't go to Peru, but he was here, but Peruvian shaman. So I guess through a lot of the personal development work, I mean, I read books and took courses and, you name it, I did it. The weirder it was, the more intriguing it sounded to me. And and there was even a point where I was like, okay, I feel like my life is like not going exactly how I thought. And so I joke around. I'm like, if you would have told me to like eat dirt and spin around in a circle and lay on the ground and it would help, like I would have done it. So I was in a, yeah, right. Like you're just like, something's got to give. Right. And I don't know what it is, but I'm willing to give it a shot. So I just came across like this Peruvian spiritual circle and then just started going to these events. And, after a lot of that type of work that, releases and heals trauma. And I'm coming from like not thinking I had a lot of trauma in my childhood. You know what I mean? Like I'm like, I feel like I grew up pretty normal, whatever that means. Right. But come to find out, we just have trauma about things we don't even know we have trauma about. Like, so that was a huge step.
It's all our different nervous systems. And, I've heard others who are far more eloquent and certainly studied and have degrees in neurobiology and trauma talk about trauma. And they really say that there's no difference between, quote unquote, little t trauma and big T trauma, at least as far as our nervous systems are concerned, that we always all experience it. And what I might consider, and certainly we know this, right? Like what I might consider traumatic, the same thing you could experience. And for you, it's not. And for whatever reason. So yeah, even if we have these beautiful, amazing childhoods and young adulthoods, there's still trauma. Right.
Right. Yeah. And I think that that's what, it could be as simple as one of your friends in elementary saying they hate your haircut. And for whatever reason, you had some like trauma about it. Or it could be like, my dog got hit by a car one time and I had told him I hated him that same day. And like, this was trauma. I told him, I was upset at him and I was like, oh, I hate you. I wish you would die. And he literally ran on the road and got killed that same night. Like that's something that I experienced in one of these ceremonies that I was like, oh my God, I totally forgot. Like, I better be careful what I say because it might happen, and then, so we just don't know the level of like, it could seem small or it could seem big, but it is still trauma and it does get stored in our body.
Yeah. And I think that's the key part is it's stored there, whether we want it to be stored there or not. And even if we think we've processed it, so even if we are cognizant of it and we think we've processed it, we might have done that cognitively, but our bodies haven't necessarily released that trauma or processed that trauma, right?
Exactly. And that's why, obviously, I'm not a doctor here, but, I think that a lot of times when people have disease or cancer or things of that like nature, like sometimes I feel like it could be trauma that's just stored in the body that really needs to get out. And sometimes it's like, has to get your attention like that.
In some way. Yeah. So here you are on this self-development path and you're working with this Peruvian shaman and you have some sense that maybe you know a little bit more than the average person about things. What happens next?
Yeah. So in this particular ceremony, I was with a friend and I asked him a question about like his grandmother. I was like, does your grandma, and I don't even remember what the question was, but I asked him something about his grandmother and he was like, yeah. And I was like, whoa, that's crazy. How would I know that about your deceased grandmother? And so then that's when I went over to the shaman and was like, do you think I could be a medium? And he was like, like literally like that, like not excited about it at all. And then I was like, well, I think I'm afraid of it. And he's like, mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, like that was like the extent of the conversation. And I'm like, okay, well, that was like, now what do I do? Right. So I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'll go take that information. And so after that ceremony, I did go home and just Google searched mediumship. Had no idea what the heck it even really meant. Like I didn't even know how I even knew what mediumship was, to tell you the truth, because I mean, that's not like a word I heard growing up. And so I found this course with a woman who was very high up in the Navy at one point, and then she became, discovered she was a medium. And so when I was like, oh, I'll totally take this course because she seems like me, logical, left brain, like I'm going to understand what she's talking about. It didn't feel like so far out there that I was going to have no clue. And then I took that course and I came back to the shaman a couple months later and was like, hey, I've been trying this mediumship stuff out. And so he introduced me to a now friend who was a mentor, and I took a lot of her classes and literally just practiced. It sounds odd, but it was also during COVID. So when I didn't have anything to do, I'd call friends up and be like, hey, are you open to me like trying to see if maybe I can connect to your grandmother, or like, I don't know, let's see what happens. And I just get on the phone with friends and be like, whoa, this is actually like happening. So that's how it kind of continued to develop.
Were you still practicing law at that point?
I had other corporate type of jobs. I've done a lot in sales. So yeah, I had a corporate job that I was doing. And so on the side, I would just do these readings to try it out. And then I was getting referrals and people started paying me. And I was like, whoa, this is crazy. I'm getting paid to do this. Like, this is amazing. But so I had the corporate job, for a decent amount of time on, and I would do readings on this side. And then finally it just came a point where like physically I couldn't do my job because I was so burnt out that I was like, oh, this is a pretty good indicator that I'm probably not in the right position. And I knew I had this ability that I wasn't using that I knew could really help people. And so I said, I got to give this a shot and see if I can make more out of this. And so that's how I made the transition.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty remarkable. I'm interested also in the person from the Navy who had, been high up in the Navy with a similar story, it sounds like very left brain type of, or at least that's what we associate with people being, high up in the Navy. And yet you can still have this. I mean, I don't know if mediumship is a right brained or left brained or an any brained thing, but, we just wouldn't normally think of somebody who's in that world having those abilities. And I know, I still practice law, and I do, other types of work and coaching with people when I'm not working my day job. And it is amazing because people, like, there's this dissonance, right? Or people experience it like, wait, you're a lawyer also? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. But the truth is, and I guess that's what my message is here for the listeners, is like, you can't judge a book by its cover. And all of your experiences are what led you to discover your ability to be a medium, just like, all of anybody else's experiences lead them to wherever they are. And it doesn't need to be one way or the other. You can be both. Although it sounds like for you at some point, the corporate world just didn't align with you anymore. It was burning you out and you had to go do something else.
Right. I actually think that possibly part of my going to law school and the legal piece was to give a little bit of credibility when I say I'm a medium, right? Like, it's weird because you can say you're an attorney, and for whatever reason, we have that as like, oh, okay, well, obviously you went to school and you studied. Like, yes, I did do that. Right. And I don't know why that makes things different, but on some level, I think it does. And then especially in that profession, that I think that there are a lot more very intuitive, claircognizant attorneys out there, but there might not be recognizing it. So to me, it's like, I feel like I'm kind of an undercover hippie being like, hey, guess what? You might have this too. Right? Like, I'm probably not the only one.
The undercover hippie. I love it.
Like, and then with the legal credibility. So that's what I think, that sometimes I could be a person to help other attorneys, or in this very business side, to be like, oh, you know what? I have that too. Right. So I'm just was willing to be like, I just can't do this anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, like you said, there's that credibility for, people who might be doubting. Well, they think, well, wait a minute. She has this additional credibility of, she's been a practicing attorney. She's worked in the corporate world. Maybe this is real. maybe there is something to this. She's not some, like whatever people think from like the cartoons from like the 80s, with the person, or other TV shows. Doesn't have to be cartoons, with the crystal ball and, the scarves and all of that. And that's not it at all.
Yes. And I think that's like so funny because I did an event, and it was actually for like a bunch of vendors for a senior care place. And they had me there for Halloween, of course. And so I was going to do readings, but I was dressed very normal, And this one woman finally was like, "Oh, wow, you got here earlier than I did." And I was like, "Well, yes, I did want to make sure I was early since I'm, leading this event." And she goes, "Oh, wait, you're the psychic medium?" I said, "Yeah." She's like, "Oh, I was just expecting somebody totally different." And so to me, it's really funny to be just a very normal person. And that's why, like, when people do call me for events, they're like, "Well, do you bring things or do you?" And I said, "No, I'm just a very like nondescript normal person, because I want people to know you could be like anybody and do this."
Yeah, you're not like a magician with a hat that you're pulling a rabbit out of. Like,
Yeah.
a person.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you can explain what it feels like. So when you work with somebody, when you're doing a reading, maybe walk us through what a reading is like and what it feels like for you.
Okay. So my friend who describes this, I think, perfectly, I always say, like, this is the best way to describe it, is that it's like Pictionary, charades, and telephone happening all at the same time. So I see things, and I've had to develop all of the different clairs, because claircognizant, as I mentioned, clear knowing was essentially the main thing that I knew. But claircognizant is clear seeing. So I see things like an image. So if I told you to picture an elephant, right, that probably just popped into your mind. So that's how I see things. I hear the same way, like if you were to be singing a song in your head, it comes in my voice. And this is what can be confusing to people, is like, sometimes you're like, well, that's my voice, but that seems like kind of a weird thought. Like, where did that come from? Did I make that up? So that's the aspect of, of hearing. There's clairsentience, which is a clear feeling. And feeling for me sometimes can result in like chest pains if somebody died from a heart attack, or, stomach, if somebody had like stomach pains, if somebody had stomach cancer. So it's all those things can be happening at the same time. They don't always all happen at the same time. It could be different pieces, happening. But I will describe to somebody in the reading, like, I'm seeing, I get a lot of cars. Like, I'm seeing a red Corvette, and so I'll start describing like what I'm seeing, or if I'm hearing something specific, what I'm hearing. And my job is also at the same time to try to be figuring out like what's going on with all of that as I'm telling the person getting the reading. And so it's a little bit of like me doing my best to interpret, and then also understanding if they are, if they're understanding what I'm talking about. So it's just like a whole bunch of things happening at the same time too.
Yeah, it almost sounds like the image I got in my mind is like you being an antenna with all these like things coming into the antenna, right? And so you're getting it, but then you're also so you're the receiver, but you also are the speaker, right? So it has to come through you too.
Exactly. And there are times where I feel like it just starts channeling through me, where I'm like saying things that I don't even know what I'm saying. And I can't go back and tell you what I said, and that's why I record the sessions for everybody, because do not ask me to tell you what I told you, because I don't know. It's like, it literally just comes out my mouth, and I'm just like saying all this stuff. And I'm like, wow, this is so crazy. Like, it's like, wow, who knows? So yeah, I like the antenna analogy.
Yeah. So yeah, kind of like an antenna, kind of like a speaker, kind of like all the things. That's interesting that your clairsentience also comes alive, and you actually will feel the things. So does that get uncomfortable sometimes?
It can. Sometimes the chest pains can be. And I didn't realize, like, you could actually ask spirit, like, hey, don't give me the messages in that way. Because my friend, I was like, wait, you mean you don't feel that stuff? She's like, no, I just ask not to feel that. And I'm like, oh. So sometimes, like, well, spirit, could we do that in a different way?
Yeah.
I don't enjoy the chest pains.
Do you get names of people typically?
I can, yes. And so names can be for people who are in the living and who have passed, but it's, it is really great when you can get a name. And like, what greater evidence than that? And now it's not always a guarantee, but there are names that will come through. So yeah, that's pretty interesting. And I forget, I was doing a reading with somebody and their cats came through, and there were two names that were kind of similar. And I said both of the names. I was like, it's like this or like that. And she was like, oh my God, I had actually both those cats were named. I was like, oh God, like, so some of that stuff to me, I always just get a chuckle about some of these things. Like I remain in awe of how spirit works. And I think that's one reason, like, I just am like, how is that even possible? How would I know that? So to me, it's really fascinating.
Yeah, so you'll communicate with the living who you're doing a reading with, and it sounds like you get validation that what is the messages that you're getting or the images that you're getting are right.
Yes, and that's important to me, the evidence piece of it to be evidential, because I don't want anybody to think that I could be making this up. And there's some stuff that comes through, like there's just no chance I could know. And so to me, the evidence is huge because, if I'm naming somebody's specific car that they had, or I can't even remember because there's just been so many different types of evidence. Like I remember one guy was talking about like a specific baseball card that was in the collection. And he was like, no, I know that baseball card, like, it's like, how would I know this stuff? So that to me is very important because I definitely don't want anyone to ever think that I'm making stuff up.
Yeah, so what types of situations, or maybe there's a common theme among the people that you work with? Is it grief? Is it closure? Is it forgiveness? All of the above? Nothing?
Yeah, I mean, I've had the range where I've worked with, like, I remember one woman who was a real estate agent. She's like, I just thought it sounded interesting. So I wanted to get on here. And, we had things come up around her business that she was like, oh, great, I'm going to implement that stuff because it makes sense. And so there's, from that perspective to recently, I did a reading for somebody who lost their child, and wanted the closure and the peace to know that their child was okay. So it really is the gamut. And again, of course, grief and other people who are just curious and want to see what happens, So, yeah, it's a range. And I find that every reading is they're all very unique. Like there'll just be things that you're like, whoa, who would even think that could come out?
Yeah, and I think I remember you telling me like you've even done these in bars.
Yeah, that's my favorite, actually.
Yeah, why? What's
Bar
up with
and
the
you
bars?
do a live event. Yeah, no, it's my favorite, actually, because again, it started out as a Halloween thing. You just don't know where doing a Halloween event could take you. They invited me to come do a gallery style reading, or what they call platform mediumship, which is like a large group of people. I just kind of wait to see what spirits show up and start describing it to the audience and then figure out like where I'm going. And so we give little messages to as many people as I can during that time. So I literally stand behind the bar and like give these messages to people. And so it's funny. I even have like now that it sells out. Like I go once a month to this bar and it sells out, and it's a lot of fun. And I would love to be doing more events like that because you get to kind of touch a lot of people. And it's also fun, I feel like, for other people to watch what's happening so they can see, like, from a outsider's perspective, kind of watching what happens as well. So yeah, the groups are my favorite.
Yeah, and I imagine, people will get a reading, but maybe they're with somebody who's like a little bit of a naysayer or a little bit of a doubter, but then they see it and it's like, oh, this stuff does work.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, you don't know, like sometimes the readings end up being for the most skeptical person that's there, you're like, oh, okay. All these other people really want a reading and you're a little skeptical, but that's okay. That's how it works. Sometimes you just don't know who's going to get the message either.
Yeah. I mean, and have you run into a lot of skepticism?
There's been a decent amount of it. And I find that when it's somebody who's super skeptical, I don't really want to work with that person necessarily, because it's a lot of energy either way, right? But it's a lot harder when you don't have somebody that's like at least a little bit open to it, because to me it feels like I'm working against like energy that's almost pushing me back. And I don't really want to prove myself when there's lots of people who are really wanting messages, So to me, I'm like, I don't really want to waste my time and your time and take away from somebody else who actually wants the message, So if there are things where I feel like it's going to be just like super, super skeptical, I probably won't do it.
And yeah, I can understand that. It sounds like you've had a great variety of experiences, and some of them probably fairly emotional. Like you talked about the person who recently lost their child and you just know that they were okay. Like, how does that impact you? And how do you deal with that part of the grieving process with the person?
To me, initially, it was super hard. I remember the first reading I did where there was somebody who passed by a suicide, and I did not know how to take, like, I definitely wasn't prepared for what that would feel like. And so that one hit me really hard. And I was like, oh, I got to figure out how to deal with this, because if this is going to be how it is, I can't actually do this. But now I've been able to see it more as like, if a doctor were performing a surgery and somebody passed, obviously you don't want that to happen and it's hard, but it also is part of your job, to do these things. And so now also knowing how healing it can be or how it gives them peace of mind is that's the piece that I focus on, not, and also like, connecting with the spirits when I can feel like, what, the spirit is super happy right now, like this. And so that also is very helpful to me as well. And yeah, it's a little bit like kind of just taking yourself out of it and being the messenger. It's like I have this job to be the messenger and I need to take my human side out and give the message. So that's kind of how I've been able to do it.
It's the coach in me. I can't help it. I'm like, how are you caring for yourself?
Yeah, I know. And then there's like Epsom salt baths and, other things to take care of. No, but it's true, right? Because that could be super draining if you allow all of that. And so I try to just think of it as like I'm a channel for the time that I'm doing the messages and the reading. And then I try to reground myself and then move forward. And I also try to have the mindset, like a lot of people be like, oh my God, I get so drained, or like, and so I just also tell myself, like, I'm not that drained. Like, I don't know how to, there's also a mindset component. I don't know how to totally explain it, but I don't allow myself to get kind of wrapped up in like, oh, now I'm just exhausted. I don't carry that story with me.
Yeah. Is there like any particular energy work that you do for yourself so that that doesn't happen?
I just visualize myself like in a clear bubble of light before I do a lot of this stuff as well. And then if I come home and maybe like sage around myself or do take Epsom salt baths, things of that nature, where there actually is like something physical that I'm doing as well. Oh, I also ride my Peloton bike like a maniac sometimes, and I process a bunch of energy that way. So if anybody saw me doing it, they'd be like, whoa, that's insane.
Yeah, it sounds like a healthy way to process the energy that is generated there. And so you do one-on-one readings. Obviously, you do the platform readings. Is there any other kind of work that you do in this area?
I also do longer term coaching with people too, which can be more intuitive based. So I feel like a lot of times when somebody gets a bunch of information, I like to be able to support them in having that information, processing it, and then also implementing it. And so when I work with people on a longer term basis, to me, it's like, all right, here's the information that we got today. Like, let's take the steps to implement this so we can actually create that change in your life. So sometimes, obviously, I do one on one readings. However, I like where I can be more supportive to help people implement the aspects of it. So yeah, that's kind of how I do it. But I think truly the gallery style is my favorite, just because I can get a lot more to more people in like an hour and a half than to just do like one really deep dive in an hour with a one-on-one. But I'm still finding my way on ultimately how I work the best.
Yeah, it seems like the gallery would be fun, but the longer term coaching is intriguing. So, what would somebody do? So they come to you maybe for your intuitive abilities, not, and I'm using air quotes here, just your mediumship. So you're tapping into all of your clairs, all of your intuition and intuitive abilities to help this person on whatever journey they're on. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. So it could be interesting because, for example, I had one client who came to me. She wanted help with her business. And what ultimately happened was that she found a relationship, ended up getting married. And like, I mean, like what she came to me for to solve the problem, which really wasn't the problem, it was like something totally different. So that's what's kind of fun about it is like people can come to me for one thing and then we'll be like, oh, right, you think you have a business problem, but actually the challenge is that there's this unhealed thing with your father that we need to move through first. Right. So let me bring a message from dad and get that piece cleared and then we can move on. So it's like, you get people show up with all kinds of different things. We just don't know where it's ultimately going to go. I do and have worked specifically with people with grief. I have had a mentor who's very intuitive as well. But when her mom passed, she was like, I'm not getting the messages, or I don't know if I'm getting the messages. Can you help me? And so part of that process was helping her recognize like the signs and symbols from her mom, how to trust that she was actually getting that information, and then supporting people so they can build that relationship with their past loved ones so they don't need me to always be bringing messages. Like they can feel like they've established that communication on their own.
Wow, that's beautiful. Yeah, because that's really ultimately what somebody wants, right? Is to be able to have that communication with the loved one that has passed, and they don't necessarily need that continued support after a while.
Right. And like I feel like part of my job is to help people understand that so they can understand their own abilities and gifts and things as well. So it's not me. I want to have people feel empowered to get that information on their own.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so are you still getting messages from your dad and sense him around?
Yes, it'll be, I mean, sometimes he's just so clever. Like, and I'm like, oh God, that was such a good one. Like I can't think of like, for example, and I've shared this, like his birthday was 9/11. So I'll see 9/11 almost every morning. And I say, it's not like I'm sitting there staring at the clock, like waiting for that to happen. It just happens. That's one. But it'll be things like his name was Howard, and I'll look over and, there's like the Howard Street sign or like something just so crazy where it's like, oh, come on. How is that even possible right now? So it's funny to me because he was very much like a joker in real life. I mean, real life, well, like in his physical form. So when there are things like in spirit that are so funny, I'm like, of course he's doing that. Like, of course he would have something funny as well. So yeah, that brings me a lot of joy. And that's what I hope for other people is that they get to, establish those relationships with their loved ones and then be able to have that spirit and essence. Like, of course, I would love to have him in physical form, but hey, if he's going to play jokes with me in spirit form, I'll take that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess I wonder what his spirit thinks of you and this work that you're doing.
Well, fortunately, I've had some readings when I've been in classes with other people, and they will say, like, your dad is really proud of you for doing this and for stepping out and doing something different. And ironically, my dad was an attorney too. So the fact that I'm getting like the seal of approval from the other side, even though I'm not practicing law and that I'm helping people in this way. And truly, when I went into law, I just wanted to help people. And law was one of the ways that I saw as a way to help people, right? That's all I knew, kind of. So now I'm doing that, but just in a very different way. And to me, this is so much more fun than practicing law.
I can see that. Well, so if somebody wanted to work with you, see what you do, that kind of thing, how would they find you?
Yes. So you can go to my website, kristenswinehart.com. What I'm doing there is I've offered like a super deep discounted $19.99 actually to attend an online group reading. So you can have the experience of what it's like to see a psychic medium in action. If you go on these groups, it doesn't mean that you have to get a reading. So if you're just curious and want to check it out, that's one thing. And then there's the option to work with me one-on-one on that site as well. But I wanted to be able to offer something at an inexpensive price so people could have the experience of it, because I get that you might not want to invest a lot sometimes if you're like, well, what the heck's even going to happen? So that's what I'm kind of trying out here. So we'll see what happens. But that's where you can find me, kristenswinehart.com.
I love that. I'll put that in the show notes. I wonder if we're channeling Prince a little bit, because you did mention a red Corvette and then it's 1999. And I was like,
oh my gosh. No, I get him a lot.
Do you really?
Yes, I've gotten Prince before. And it's funny because he'll show up at things. So, and that very astute you are, noticing those are some of the signs, right? So yeah, that he does show up sometimes. So there you go.
I think he's here. I'm going to go.
I do too. Like, I'm like, yep, that makes sense now. Yeah. And I don't ever really use the red Corvette example. Like, that was odd. So
yeah, that
sometimes,
right
yeah, you never know.
We'll take it. And
yeah, sure.
And wish you were still here, but thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Kristen, so much. It's been such a pleasure. And I can't wait to have you on and maybe sometime in the future and see how things are going, because I think the work that you're doing is amazing. And, I too, for whatever it's worth, am proud when a fellow attorney, just goes out there and follows their heart and their, what they're aligned with. And like you said, all you ever wanted to do was help people. And that's what you're doing. So thank you for doing that work.
Oh my gosh, thanks so much for having me on. And yes, for the kind words, for actually understanding why somebody might leave the practice of law.
Oh, yes. Another conversation for another day, my friend.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, everybody, if you like this conversation, make sure to rate the show in Apple or Spotify or wherever you are listening so that others can find it and enjoy it too. And if you like the show and want to keep hearing great conversations with really interesting people about how they found their purpose, please donate to the show. Go to thefullymindful.com to donate today. Hey everybody, it's Melissa, and I'm wondering if you all can relate. Have you ever caught yourself procrastinating or maybe doubting your abilities, or maybe you have a black belt inner critic like I do or have had that wants to sabotage your every move with judgment and perfectionism expectations? It might keep you stuck, it might keep you anxious and away from your full potential. The Positive Intelligence Program, PQ, is a powerful 6-week journey designed to help you quiet those saboteurs, embrace positivity, and find flow in your life. Through daily practices and weekly focuses, we'll work together to build your mental fitness. The PQ app will guide you every step of the way and support you, and you'll be supported either by myself in a one-on-one or in a small group of like-minded individuals where you can share insights and progress. So reach out, contact me at info@thefullymindful.com to find out how we can work together one-on-one or in a small group today.